Thank you. I hope I earn those applause. So I'm delighted to be here. I get nervous when I speak, so I'm just going to let you all know, as an act of self-compassion to myself, to disclose to you that it's just how it is for me, and I trust that others in the room know what that's like. I'm delighted to be here. So I am the senior instructor, I'm looking, who am I, of education programs at Zen Hospice Project. I'm really grateful to Rosemary and Margaretta and Elle for inviting me here today and to be with all of you. I have been with Zen Hospice Project for about 15 years. I started out as a volunteer bedside caregiver, and over time and just kind of my tenacity, I was there long enough that they started to ask me to do things, and I was honored to say yes. And I participate in training volunteer caregivers, and then I teach our public education programs. And we teach caregivers, not unlike yourselves, and clinicians when they come to us. So this work of caregiving is very near and dear to my heart. Teaching and supporting caregivers. I have received care from a caregiver. I have been a caregiver to a child and to my father at the end of his life. My mother is still living, and she's not chronically ill, but she is in her 80s, and I feel like I'm an emotional caregiver for her, certainly. And then just one more thing about myself to give you background. I also teach compassion cultivation training, which is a part of a program at the Stanford University School of Medicine. There's a project there called the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education. Bit of a mouthful, but there's a beautiful compassion cultivation training program that I also teach throughout the Bay Area, trained by them. And I want to acknowledge you all have been here through this long, I know, full, beautifully designed and lovingly crafted day, and taken in a lot, I'm sure, and are integrating a lot. And I also want to call out your being here as an act of self-compassion. So we're going to talk about self-compassion, what that is, and what it might feel like to consider giving this to ourselves. But I want to start by saying that your presence in this room is an act of self-care and self-compassion for yourselves. So you're already there. You're already doing it, believe it or not. And I think I'd like to, from there, just do a little brief kind of arriving meditation practice. So it doesn't require anything special, but just giving ourselves the chance to kind of align our thoughts and our feelings with where our bodies are right now. So if you have anything in your lap, you could maybe set it aside. If you have never meditated or you think you don't like to meditate, that's absolutely fine. This is not a test, or there's no grading, there's no right or wrong way to do it. But just asking you to kind of turn inward, maybe close your eyes if that feels comfortable and safe. If you don't want to close your eyes, you can just cast your gaze kind of gently downward. And just bringing some attention to your inner landscape, if you will. Maybe noticing the rhythm of your breath. You don't need to change it in any way. Maybe after that fantastic session with Reagan, your heart rate is still up a little bit. But just noticing what's happening inside. And then bringing that inner voice that we all have to your awareness, and just extending a little bit of appreciation to yourself for being here. Kind of a little welcoming. Whatever it took to get here today, if you are caring for someone, that may have been a task in itself to arrange for respite or another trusted person to be with your loved one, your patient. So just some kind, supportive, welcoming, appreciative energy towards yourself. And if that feels challenging or mysterious, or there's some resistance to that, just note that as well. Just let yourself acknowledge that you're not quite sure what I mean by that, or you're not quite sure how to receive that from yourself. Yeah. Great. And then just letting your attention come back into the room. You can open your eyes gently if they've been closed. Yeah, and maybe look around the room, just seeing the other good people who you've been with. Yeah, great. So I'm going to ask you first to do a little writing exercise, and I trust that you all have journals, right, and pens nearby, so just have those ready. And to say very generally about self-compassion, we can kind of think of self-compassion as treating ourselves the way we treat a good friend. It can really be just that simple. Treating ourselves the way that we would treat a good friend. That kind of care and kindness, acceptance. But this is easier said than done for most of us. And it's worth exploring, what exactly do we mean by that? So I'd like you to take a moment and think about times when you have responded to a friend who's come to you to share some kind of difficulty or struggle that they are experiencing. So just thinking of times when you yourself have been in a relatively stable, well-resourced place, but a friend, a colleague, a neighbor, a family member comes to you and shares some difficulty that they're having. And this doesn't have to be a big, life-altering, situation. But maybe a disappointment or frustration, or they're just not feeling good about themselves. There's some self-doubt. And just think about, what do you say to a friend who comes to you for this kind of support or listening ear? And what do you say, and what tone of voice do you use? And even what kind of posture, what body posture, and any nonverbal expression do you reach out? Do you wish to reach out? Do you do anything with your hands, towards your friend? So just thinking of those things and taking a couple minutes to jot down, if you haven't already started doing so. Yeah, just what comes up. What do you know about yourself in that situation? And if you are not sure what to write, or you feel like you're done writing, then I will invite you to just kind of stay with that sense that you've evoked of yourself responding to a friend who's come to you to share some difficulty that they're facing. And I'll ask you to turn inward again. You can close your eyes if that's comfortable. Just kind of set your pen down and reconnect with your inner self. Maybe take a breath or two there. And consider now times when you have been experiencing some kind of misfortune. And I might ask you here to think of something a little bit smaller and maybe more, quote unquote, everyday than the caregiving role that you are in right now. You may, of course, think of that if that's what comes up for you. But I'm also thinking of the more, I'm calling them smaller, a kind of disappointment, or, you lost your temper, or you just kind of messed up, you blew it in some situation. And you felt inadequate. And to consider, how do you typically respond to yourself in those situations? And the questions are the same. What do you say? So maybe you say something out loud. I know I can do that, like, oh, Mary, you idiot. But there's an inner voice too. So what do you say to yourself? What's that self-talk? And what's the tone that you use with yourself when you've experienced some kind of disappointment or you're feeling self-critical? And your posture, what do you notice about your body when this happens for you? And are there any nonverbal gestures? So letting all that come up. Yeah. And as we go along, I invite you, if it feels like a lot comes up, if it seems overwhelming or sad to look at this, to just breathe with that, to just say, this is true for me. Wow, this is overwhelming. Or maybe there's kind of nothing. Maybe you feel a little numb or not quite able to connect in what I'm asking you to do. So just noting that. Yeah, I'm not sure about this. And then jotting down, as you did before, if you haven't already, just what did you discover? What comes up as you investigate about how you respond to yourself in the face of life's challenges that we all know, we all experience. Yeah. And if you are done writing or you're not writing, again, I invite you to just kind of stay with that sense of looking at your responses to yourself in this way. Let's try groups of 3. And you can, I think, as best you can, sort of turn chairs and make triads with the people around you. And I'll keep time, but it'll be about 10 minutes total. So hold on, don't start yet. And it's always that, do I give instruction? Do I get you in place? Yeah, always a facilitator's roll of the dice, and it always feels like, I should have gone the other way.
So go half and half.
Exactly, learning to make that split. So 10 minutes total, but I'm going to trust you all in your triad to give each person a chance to share. Just kind of what was that like? What came up? What did you notice about how you respond to a friend who comes to you sharing a difficult circumstance, and how do you respond to yourself when you are facing a challenge? So I want everyone to get a chance to speak, but I also want to say something about when you are listening to the person in your group of 3 or whatever it works out to be who's speaking, that this practice of listening, and I use that word practice, this can be a really powerful act of compassion, act of service, and even self-compassion to really open yourself kind of fully, generously, lovingly to hear another person's story. And you may notice when you're listening that you want to ask questions, or you want to, offer a solution, or you want to comfort or correct. So I'm going to ask you to note that, but not really have it be that kind of conversation. Just being aware of how we lovingly and kindly want to comfort people, but sometimes maybe, want to fix them because the discomfort that we're hearing makes us uncomfortable too. So we want to kind of tamp that down or protect ourselves against that. So this practice of listening and really staying with what you're receiving, is something I'm going to invite you to engage into. Please wrap up with your small group shares. We'll take a little bit of time now to hopefully hear from some of you about what that was like. What did you discover? How did it feel? And we can have a conversation. Yeah. Please, hi, will you say your name? I can't see your...
My name is Susan.
Hi, Susan, thank you.
I'm just interested to notice, not only in this session, but all day long, how repeatedly, eventually humor comes into the picture. And so the spirit in different places and times finds itself laughing, even after and during the time when you're talking about really hard things. So it's just an interesting observation.
Yeah, thank you. Is humor supportive for you, would you say, in that way, in your journey? For you, yeah.
I would say for me, yes, and I
Yeah.
believe for everybody that was there.
Yeah.
Even people who are quieter, they might just smile, and other people are just laughing and falling off the chair. So,
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, wonderful. Well, the personality, right? Some of us are more raucous and falling off the chair, but even that reminding our muscles and our neurology what happens when we smile. So to experience that genuine smile, so important. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, please. Is it Marty?
Yeah, Marty.
Hi, Marty, thanks.
So I think we found in our group a lot of similarities between the three of us that in the half of it where we talked about how we would act toward a friend who had difficulty was similar, and how we would act toward ourselves in difficulty was also very similar and surprising maybe a little bit to us, where we were, there were a lot of listening and so on for the friend, but very self-critical. If we had a difficulty, like if you did something wrong, it was terrible,
Right.
and ignoring all the right things that you do.
Yeah.
But for a friend, it was like we're totally on board to listen and support and everything like that. So obviously, very different reaction in the two situations.
Yeah, thank you. So bingo, right. Yes, I mean, thank you for the clarity, noticing that. And noticing that in yourself and noticing that in others, right? This is my experience, and I'm not the only one. And I want to say in my personal experience and then working with this material, you three are not the only ones also, right, who experience it this way. Yeah, so I wonder, anybody else in the room kind of have that sense of noticing a difference and more, maybe more criticism towards ourselves? It's not true for everyone, but it's very common. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, exactly. Right, in the same circumstance.
And one thing we were discussing a little bit is it also depends on the situation and circumstances that your friend may be coming with you for their situation on how you respond to them. But typically, I think most people, like love, compassion, things along that line. But sometimes you have to look at your friend and say, "You're being stupid." Hence why we were laughing. One of the reasons, because if it's a friend, you're going to be honest on how you truly feel about it. And like I said, depending on what the situation is, it may not be a loving, as I used to say, a kumbaya time. It may be a time to listen. No, you need to get yourself straight, and here's the situation, to help them in that manner.
Yeah, thank you. Great distinction. And that truth can be shared in a way that expresses the love and compassion, and it can be shared in a way that doesn't kind of contain that, right? So
Correct.
that's a real difference, something that we can maybe choose, or it depends on our personality. But yeah, absolutely. There's, we're not specifically talking about this today, but since it comes up, this idea of fierce compassion, right? Self-compassion and compassion towards others, they're not always soft and warm and fuzzy. You know, if we're talking about reducing and relieving suffering, you know, that can look like all different kinds of response and action. Yeah,
love.
thank you. Who else noticed something, yeah, in themselves or something that came up in your discussion? Yeah. Please, yeah.
You talked about the physical contact. We talked about hugging or just touching someone when you're talking to them, and I thought it was interesting. It was just an interesting topic, especially nowadays when it's politically not good to touch anyone, because if you do, you might be read wrong. But we're saying we were talking about how important it is to be able to actually have human touch. That it's really important.
Yeah.
And needed nowadays.
Yeah.
And I feel sad that we can't just give people hugs without worrying about how they're going to take it.
I feel sad about that too. I mean, I'm a hugger, and somewhere there's, you know, a balance maybe in respecting those boundaries and being able to express ourselves and or express our love in that way. And I'm thinking that when that sadness comes up, like I have this impulse and I don't know if it's going to be received correctly or it's going to cause more of a problem, then maybe bringing some self-compassion to yourself about the sadness of that. It's a real experience. Yeah. Yeah, how about anybody from the other side of the room? I mean, anyone, of course, but I notice a little. Yeah. What's happening on this side? Please,
I
yeah.
don't have anything new to add, just to say that we experienced the same thing, where to other people we were compassionate and listening and kind, and to ourselves, not so much.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the comments don't have to be new or groundbreaking. Yeah, in fact, kind of beginning to emphasize the truth of this. Yeah. Anybody else, please, want
So I
to?
got to the place where it's easy to be self-critical.
Yeah.
And I'm learning more acceptance for just the way life is, and that, you know, I can't fix it all.
Right.
And I just have to accept that I do things wrong, and you know, I make mistakes, and I have to accept that and just move on and let go of it.
Right.
Yeah, it's easier to have compassion for others, for me at least, than it is to have compassion for myself. Hold myself to a pretty high standard.
Right.
And it's been a long road to sort of accept that I can't control the fate of humanity.
Exactly.
And you know, I just have to live as best I can today, here, now.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you. I can't control the fate of humanity. That stands out to me. One thing, an element of self-compassion, which I'll say more about in a few minutes, but this idea of common humanity. So one reason that we can be so much more critical, less compassionate to ourselves than to others, is this sense that, you know, it can come from our entire childhood, whatever our experience was when we were young, and what we believe about ourselves, whether it's true or not true. But when we mess up, when we suffer, it's very common to feel like we have been singled out. You know, our failure has brought our suffering upon us in a way that we don't necessarily bring to other people. We recognize, just as you were saying, this is kind of part of how it is. You know, we're not in control, and things happen, and mistakes, everybody makes mistakes, and we just kind of move on. Hopefully, maybe we grow from them, or they're not too damaging. And when it's ourself, we tend to forget, you know, that there's this common human quality. Yeah. And we think it's only us, and surely because we are such terrible people, that's why we're suffering. Yeah. Anybody else want to share anything or ask anything? Yeah. I want to share a couple numbers with you about how common this is, right? We're saying that most of us in the room, and I'm assuring you that outside the room it's also true, that general population, US adults, data from 2016, but I don't think it's changed much, about 78% of people say this very same thing, that it's far easier to feel compassionate towards others than it is for ourselves. But it's not true for everybody. There's a small percentage. Some people are easier on themselves and just that kind of tough love, and maybe there's not even the love. There's just criticism and, towards others. And then it's a small percentage, about 16% of the population report that it's kind of the same, no real difference. So there's some variation, but the vast majority of us, experience it this way. So let's just talk a little bit about kind of why. What is it? And again, without getting into, we're not in therapy, I'm not a therapist, there's lifelong reasons, maybe reasons. But there is some work in compassion-focused therapy, it's called. There's a man in the UK by the name of Paul Gilbert who is this is his life's work. And he has some clinical scales, actually, looking at fears of compassion. So I want to share with you a couple of very common fears that people express of offering compassion to themselves. Like, if I am compassionate towards myself, if I cut myself some slack, if I recognize that I'm not the only one, and this kind of happens to everybody, we all experience disappointments or we all mess up. I fear that if I'm kinder and more compassionate to myself, my standards will drop, right? I won't hold myself to some standard of excellence, I worry that if I develop compassion for myself, I'll become dependent on it. That's such a fascinating one to me, like, what's the problem with being dependent on compassion? But this is a fear. So I have some more on my list here, but I wonder if anybody has an idea or an actual personal experience of some other fear or kind of, barrier, something that prevents or makes it hard or frightening to offer compassion to yourself. Yes, or do you have your hand up?
So I just want to say selfishness. It feels selfish.
Yeah, great. Thank you. It feels selfish. Yeah, do you want to say more about that? No, yeah. Right, it feels selfish. So I don't deserve it, or there is a sense that we can feel like self-compassion is self-pity. Yeah. So it's not the same thing. Self-compassion is not self-indulgent, in talking about offering ourselves compassion, it's simply because we're human, right? Just the way we would offer our compassion, our understanding, our love to a friend, who is also a human being just like us. Yeah, please.
Is there any correlation to your research and data about, personality types? There's people that are very perfectionist versus the people that are more creative, or, I'm just saying, I think perfectionists to me would be the people that would be hard on themselves.
That's a fascinating point. The truth is, I don't know that if there's that breakdown, but I don't think so. I'm sure there are exceptions, but this is kind of generally across human beings. Maybe the way that the truth of it manifests or is expressed might change depending on these kind of personality types that you're talking about. But I think it's pretty safe to say that it's common to human beings. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Are there certain cultures that they've studied where it's just the culture to be supportive, and where people are allowed to talk about death or the prospect of someone dying in a normal social setting, whereas it doesn't, it's not appropriate in our setting?
Yeah, again, I'm not going to pretend to have a lot of specific data right at my fingertips, but generally, yes. You know, we in the West, in North America, in the 21st century, it's taboo, really. Yeah, talking about death, grief, suffering, right, to which we respond naturally with compassion. So when it feels like it's not okay to feel those things or talk about them, then yeah, responding to them compassionately is that much more difficult. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Turning back to this scale for a moment, that it just feels easier to be critical of ourselves than compassionate. It's just like, it's a cultivation. It takes maybe a little bit of work. Maybe we are kind of pushing against habits and training and conditioning. So it's kind of easier to just beat ourselves up. That's another reason. Some people have shared that when I try to feel warm and compassionate for myself, I just feel empty. Yeah, so just trying to access, wanting to access that, and just finding emptiness. Yeah. And the sadness of that, right? The heartbreak of that. So then we maybe pull back even a little bit further. Yeah. Any other, before we move on, just ideas or your own experience that you want to share of a fear or a kind of barrier to compassion for yourself? Please.
I was going to say that maybe it's something about punishment. And if you're compassionate towards yourself, the need to punish yourself for doing something wrong it seems very strong. I don't know what to make of that exactly, but punishment seems to be, I mean, along those lines of the fears of compassion. It's something about if I don't punish myself, then who is? I don't know. Who else will?
Who else will? Yeah. What's up,
Yeah,
please?
so in thinking about that, of the two halves, there's like, okay, I did something good, I was supposed to do something good. There's the, I did something bad, I probably shouldn't have done that. I don't want to do those things or feel that way or act that way or whatever. In the self-compassion, it seems like I'm at a 78%, I can easily be really critical of myself. And it's like, well, yeah, you deserve to be critical, you shouldn't do those things. And so if I think about what do I have to like try to like move forward, is I going to be more understanding of myself? Maybe no, because I deserve tough love from myself. But what I know I don't do is if I do something right, that was just expected. I don't celebrate that I did something right. I don't give my credit for doing something right. Like, that's baseline behavior, you should do those things.
Yeah.
And so I think for myself, just me, if I may not start with trying to be more understanding when I'm doing something wrong, but I can maybe add something positive on the side of the equation where give myself some credit for doing something right.
Yeah.
Rather than just like not acknowledging it. That if I'm gonna like shift the scale, it's not gonna be saying like, it's okay, you messed up. Like, for me, it's probably for a while, it's still gonna be like, no, I messed up, because that was my own self-standard. And it's gonna be trying to add to the other side of giving myself some credit for doing something right, rather than just saying like, just discount that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I love this. Yeah, absolutely. And that's an act of self-compassion too, to notice and praise, sort of call out when things go well, when we do something right. But this idea about punishment, I'm going to state really broadly, again, with the caveat that each of us is coming with our whole lifetime of training and family of origin and all of that, our young experiences. But this sense that punishment works, right? If things don't go the way we want, we do something wrong or bad, then punishment will prevent it from happening again. The data that I'm most familiar with around self-compassion actually shows that the opposite, just the opposite is true. And what might be really interesting in this personal experiment that you're describing, and maybe some others of us want to try it too, like kind of see what happens as you experience both the, wow, you know, that actually went well, good for me, but continuing the familiar habit of maybe self-punishment or internal critic. And see if anything begins to shift. How do you respond when that kind of flood of self-compassion, I'm going to call it, comes into the mix. Please.
I'm wondering if when one exhibits compassion for another person or people on a regular basis, and you never get back the feeling of appreciation, or your compassion does not lead to where you want it to go, you then take it out on yourself and say, I wasn't good enough, I'm not good enough, and therefore I have to be very self-critical.
That lands with me as true. Yeah, that sounds very right and believable. Yeah. And part of that response is the pain or the disappointment of not having the compassion received the way we wish it to, or resulting in some change or some response that we were seeking. Yeah, that investment of ours and some sense of expectation, So there's, again, another presentation, another time, about our sense of, we call it attachment to the outcome, right? If I behave politely, nicely, compassionately, am I doing that at least in part because I want to elicit something specific coming back to me? And so then what does that set me up for, depending on, because we can't control the outcome. We can't control what other people are going to do and say. Yeah. But just as you say, I can very easily imagine that for many of us, we would criticize ourselves. Sure, I certainly know that as a parent, my goodness, and as a caregiver, right? I must have done it wrong because the correct outcome didn't occur. Okay. So just want to say, as we keep going, the value of, I've heard laughter and just seeing you all connect with one another, and in resourcing ourselves, in staying resilient as caregivers, as human beings, being able to name these things for ourselves, just write them down or maybe share them with a trusted person. Yeah, really being able to look at things that are true and maybe uncomfortably so. Yeah, really important to our resilience. So let's turn now, excuse me, I'm just doing a time check, to a little bit of a sort of embodied practice. I think we can do this seated. I'll let Reagan be, she was so terrific at having us up and getting our heart rate. But I do want to give you a little bit of an experience of sort of connecting viscerally, having an embodied experience of some qualities of compassion and self-compassion. So these are stability, space, and warmth. Pretty simple. But I'll ask you to, just seated where you are, to invite an experience of stability. So how do we do that? What am I talking about? Just simply feeling the weight of your body on the chair. Just kind of, you can close your eyes, you can let them stay open, but I want to bring us into our bodies again a little bit and begin to connect with a sense of stability in the body. So feeling your feet on the floor, feeling where your legs, your buttocks, your sits bones, your back maybe, all the parts of your body that are in contact with the chair that's underneath you. Just really kind of sinking into that, letting yourself feel supported. And also noticing, including in this stability, the weight of your hands wherever they are resting, and maybe your arms. So if your hands are on your thighs or your knees, maybe they're folded together, but just feeling some contact, some weight, some groundedness, some natural stability in the body without really doing anything unusual. And then space, just noticing the movement of the breath. So again, not needing to change the breath, whatever depth your breath is naturally reaching right now. It's moving in as you inhale, and it's moving back out as you exhale. And if you pay attention, you might notice that naturally on the inhale, there's a little bit of an expansion internally. You might feel it in the upper chest, depending on what's happening in your body right now. You might feel it the bottom of the rib cage or the belly. But again, just breathing normally, you can experience a quality of spaciousness. And you might also find a little sense of spaciousness just becoming aware of the air around you. You know, however close the body seated next to you is, there's some air around you, there's some space there. And then the third aspect being warmth. So I invite you here to place one of your hands, maybe first on your chest, sort of your heart area, if that feels comfortable. And notice where there might be a little bit of natural warmth. It might be more in your body. It might be more in your hand. And it might be subtle. Just seeing, is there some warmth there to feel? And alternatively, if you want to try moving your hand to your cheek, noticing any warmth there. Again, perhaps it's more the hand feels warm or the cheek feels warm. But this quality of warmth that's naturally present in the body. And then one other place, if you want to try, is just hand in contact with hand. So one hand resting in the other, hands folded. So staying for another moment or two, feeling stability, the weight of the body, just grounded right where you are. Expansion, a little bit of natural space in the body that comes just from breathing. And a little bit of warmth naturally occurring without us needing to do anything special. And remembering that these qualities are here for us, they're always available. At any time. Can always feel the weight of the body, notice the breathing, and find some quality of warmth. And then I'll invite you to go ahead and let your hand come back to rest and open your eyes if they were closed. So I'll share another kind of self-compassion tool with you now. I noticed on the resource table when I came in, the self-compassion workbook, I think it's called. So much of what I am sharing with you today is either inspired by or drawn directly from the work of Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer, who are responsible for that book. And there are lots of online resources, and just want to give credit where credit is due. So I want to share with you a tool from Mindful Self-Compassion, from their work, which is called simply a self-compassion break. So first, let me give just a little brief background on how those folks, Kristen Neff and Chris Germer, kind of understand self-compassion and break it down into these 3 pillars, one of which has come up already. But they talk about mindfulness, common humanity, and self-kindness. So very simply being aware of the presence of suffering. So that maybe sounds obvious, but often we have an instinct to turn away from suffering. We might want to ignore it or pretend it's not there, especially in ourselves, as we were talking about, right? And then the common humanity, as we said a few moments ago, recognizing that when we suffer, we haven't been singled out. We're not suffering because we failed or brought it upon ourselves necessarily. We experience suffering because this is part of what it is to be human, right? Everyone, whomever they are, whatever their life circumstances are, experience difficulty, disappointment, sometimes great, terrible suffering. And then self-kindness, so where we started out, this idea of being a friend to yourself, bringing a response to your own suffering that is like the response you would bring to a dear friend who was struggling in the same way that you are. Okay. So have a pretty easy exercise to try working with this. So if you will bring to mind a situation that is challenging for you in your life right now. So it can be the biggest one, but it doesn't have to be. And maybe working with something that feels manageable, if you will, for just a brief exercise. But whatever you choose. So, but bringing to mind a kind of specific situation that is a challenge, a struggle for you in your life right now. And just letting yourself kind of feel the stress of that, whatever else might be associated. And then just in your own mind, silently, starting with this awareness or mindfulness piece, just saying to yourself, this is a moment of suffering. Just letting yourself acknowledge that. Yeah. Or maybe this hurts. Or even simply, ouch. Yeah. I'm scared right now. Ouch. Yeah, this is hard. If you want to put a hand on your heart as we're going through this, I invite you to do that, but it's not required. So that simply is the mindfulness. Just acknowledging in the moment, this is hard, this hurts. And then the common humanity, as has already been said, suffering is a part of life. Can we respond with that first? Yeah. And maybe, if it feels right, trying out in your own mind, saying, other people know what this is like too. Or, I'm not alone. or we all struggle in our lives. And just acknowledging here that each of us experiences our life. We're the only ones. Of course, nobody else walks in our shoes. And yet, when we're talking about the things that cause us to suffer as human beings, fear and loss and sadness and self-recrimination, we can be very confident that we're not alone, that other people know what this is like too. So this is the common humanity. We don't deny that our individual experience is ours, but we allow ourselves to recognize that we're not alone in this particular kind of flavor of suffering, if you will. And then finally, the kindness, self-kindness. So maybe saying in your own mind to yourself, may I be kind to myself? As simple as that. And you can, please, find phrases or words that resonate for you. But some ideas maybe could be, may I be strong. May I learn to accept myself as I am. Or maybe asking, what do I need right now? So, the self-compassion break, mindfulness, simply, this is a moment of suffering, or ouch. Yeah, this is hard. And then common humanity, I'm not alone. Yeah. Other people know what this is like. And then finally, what do I need? That self-kindness. May I accept myself as I am. May I be patient. May I be gentle, whatever it might be. And again, a practice that can be done any time, in just a moment or two. Yeah. So I wonder if there are any, I got ahead of myself. I should say, if you haven't already, please allow your eyes to open and you can drop those phrases. Yeah, so I want to check and see if there's any questions about that or at this point, or any comments, anything coming up. Even this idea of being able to offer that to ourselves anytime, really. Yeah. How does that feel? Does that feel possible? Yeah? Yeah? Maybe? Yeah. Good. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I have learned to let myself go slowly, even when I'm standing in front of a room of people, behind a microphone. That's one way that I practice compassion. So, yeah. I think integration of things moment by moment is a real act of self-compassion. So, yeah. So the last kind of piece that I have to invite and offer for you is a self-compassion letter. So I'll say a bit about what this is and then give you time and a beautiful piece of stationery on which to write one. So this is similar to what we've already been talking about, responding to our own suffering in that kind, supportive way, just as we likely would to a friend or loved one. But it turns out that this is quite potent to actually write down, to write a letter to ourselves and write it in the third person. So, for example, if I am writing a self-compassion letter to myself, I would literally start the letter, "Dear Mary." And you express to yourself, as you would to a friend, everything that you know about that person's struggle and maybe their history, how they tend to deal with struggles. And there is some research with this, and that people who wrote self-compassion letters, it turns out, and kind of went through this process that we just did in the little self-compassion break of acknowledging the difficulty, the common humanity, and being kind to oneself, that it really does help us face, integrate, deal with the struggles that we have, be more self-compassionate, and kind of do better. So not punishment, really supporting us to make changes that we might want to make or respond with more resilience to the challenges that we face. But this kind of seemingly coming from a loving observer who knows us better than anyone, really does resource us to do our best. Yeah. So let's start this way. I want to ask you to imagine a friend who is this for you. So someone who is completely loving, unconditionally loving towards you, accepting of you. A friend who knows all of your foibles, your imperfections, knows the skeletons in your closet, if you will, the places where and times when you haven't been at your best. And they understand and love you, and see the strength and the good in you underneath all that. So I want to ask you to imagine such a friend. And as you're doing that, also just ask you to be brave enough to take note of how does it feel to imagine even such a person, What's that like? Do we even believe, that such a person would exist, would know all of our darkest dark corners of our being and still, be unconditionally supportive and loving? So, reflecting on what this friend feels towards you. You're loved and accepted exactly as you are, even with all your imperfections. This friend sees your shortcomings, maybe your less than ideal parts of yourself, and knows that by and large, they don't have anything to do with you. They're not your fault. They know your background, your upbringing, your conditioning, all the things that were outside of your control. And then, with that friend in mind, you imagine a situation that is challenging for you, a place where you're really struggling. And with that struggle, maybe those kinds of self-critical, unkind, unforgiving voices, rise up in you. You can feel that in yourself. And in the letter, you're going to write to yourself, responding to those things from the place of this loving friend. And I invite you to, as much as you can, infuse the letter with strong sense of love and acceptance and support. That recognition that your suffering is part of being human. So I have, as I said, some beautiful stationery to pass out, and I may ask Elle to remind me. You don't have to help me pass it out, but the opportunity is, if you choose to leave the letter here so that these lovely people can mail it out to you at some later date. Like ideally when you've forgotten even that you wrote it. Yeah, no kidding. We do this in our compassion classes. And it can be really quite something, to receive it somewhere down the line. If you don't want to leave the letter here, of course, you absolutely have that right and that choice. So you could take it home and maybe ask someone whom you trust to read it out loud to you. Or put it away and hopefully remember that you have it, and sometime down the line, get it out and read it to yourself. Yeah. Okay? So I'm going to pass around the paper, but I'm also, if there are any questions, please let me know. But I'm going to go ahead and just express my gratitude and share a poem and wrap up my time so I can turn it over to your hosts and let them close officially. So it's been my great honor to be with you this afternoon. I want to thank you for your attention, for your presence, for your willingness to engage in this way. It can be a lot. We slowed way down. We dropped pretty deep. Self-compassion is a lifelong practice, and we all deserve it, and it's very challenging for most of us most of the time. So thank you for stepping into this stream with me today. I brought business cards, and they're just on the resource table back there. If you want to contact me for any reason through Zen Hospice Project, I'd be happy to be of any support that I can. So the last thing I want to share with you is a poem entitled Birthright. And there's copies of that for you too. We'll leave them out. No. Despite the illness of body or mind, in spite of blinding despair or habitual belief, who you are is whole. Let nothing keep you separate from the truth. The soul, illuminated from within, longs to be known for what it is. Undying, untouched by fire or the storms of life, there is a place inside where stillness and abiding peace reside. You can ride the breath to go there. Despite doubt or hopeless turns of mind, you are not broken. Spirit surrounds, embraces, fills you from the inside out. Release everything that isn't your true nature. What's left, the fullness, light, and shadow, claim all that as your birthright. Thank you very much.